So, hello, my name is Duncan Carson. If you don't know already, you haven't been to the previous sessions in the event, I'm the Projects and Business Manager for the Independent Cinema Office, and I curate the sessions on screening days. For those of you who are visually impaired, I am a white man in his 30s with a beard, glasses, brown hair, a blue shirt against the background of some books and iron roofing. Um, uh, so if you're in need of captions, we have professionally produced a live transcription running during this session. Just click the CC button below to turn them on, or click the link in the chat. Just to let you know about how the session will run. You're free to ask questions at any time. You don't need to wait until we open up for questions at the end of the session, but there will be a part of the event for Q&A. So just drop questions in the chat and we'll pick them up as and when it's appropriate. So I'm really glad you joined us for this session. And the reason why we were keen to host a session around jobs was that we've been doing a lot of renewed thinking at the ICO over the last sort of 18 months. As people probably know, because it's often sort of the first way that ever people hear about the ICO, we run a really very well used jobs board, and it helps. And the aim of that is to help job seekers and organisations recruiting, because there's not really a kind of like centralised place for jobs. And we have around 5,000 subscribers to that list. So it has really, I think, we recognize that it has significant influence on the industry. And one of the things that we've had like renewed focus on is how you make an inclusive workforce. And I should say that recruitment isn't the only point in which you can make, you deliver a more inclusive workforce. It's like very important to look at the people's experience once they're in the job, but it is a really significant moment for change making. And we firmly believe that recruiters are going to get better candidates from a wider group of society if they make some key interventions into how they recruit and define the terms of their roles once people get into them. And I should say the reason why we're talking about this in a young person's context is that unfair recruitment practices tend to disproportionately affect young people, generally because they have fewer professional connections who can help them along or guide them in the application process, or even put them in roles, hopefully not in a nepotistic way. And they often have less experience passing the often strange codes of job applications, which we'll hopefully get into a little bit later. So that's kind of like why we wanted to talk about those things in this space. And also, I should say, they generally have less ability to define the terms of how the jobs are put across, like how define the terms of a job. Whereas once you get further on in your career, you maybe have a bit more ability to shape things. So that's why it's significant both for recruiters and for jobs and for job seekers. So we're going to be releasing our new jobs policy soon, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that. And getting feedback on it, because it's a living document that hopefully we can receive like lots of your great thinking about how you're changing recruitment. But I should say that one of the organisations that really helped shape our thinking was Fair Museum Jobs. And if you're not familiar with Fair Museum Jobs, they're a movement to highlight good and bad practices in museum jobs and recruitment. So I'm really glad today to be joined by their representatives, Ashley Hibbins and Louise McAward-White, both of whom are committee members with Fair Museum Jobs. And they're going to be laying out thoughts both on the recruitment practices that can help act as best staff and what job seekers should look out for when considering applying. So just to introduce the two speakers, Ashley, when not volunteering with Fair Museum Jobs, currently works as an evaluation audience research consultant, helping cultural organisations to become more inclusive and accessible to everyone. And Louise is a digitisation project manager at the British Film Institute and also runs their staff mentoring scheme. For the last 15 years, Louise has worked in museums and heritage, including as a curator, visitor experience manager and events coordinator. And she's speaking today as part of her work as a member of the Fair Museum Jobs Committee. So I'm going to hand over to Ashley to get us started.
Thank you so much, Duncan. That was such a good introduction. I feel like we don't even need to speak now. I feel like you've covered everything. So thank you for that. I'm just going to share my screen. Louise and I have some slides to go through with you today. So just bear with me a moment. Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can see that. So our session today is called Jobs That Work for Young People. We're going to be talking about both things that employers can do to make their recruitment practice more inclusive to young people and to all job seekers in general. So I'm going to be talking about that, and Louise is then going to be talking a bit more about how job seekers, in particular young people, can research organizations to find employers that really fit their values. So we're going to be tag teaming a little bit. But just to start off with, before we introduce who Fair Museum Jobs is a little bit more, we just wanted to go through what we're hoping everyone's going to get out of the session. So as an employer, we hope that in this session you learn some effective but equitable improvements to your recruitment practice, which will benefit all workers and job seekers, but in particular younger applicants and younger workers in the sector. We hope that you'll gain a better understanding of how recruitment practices affect and impact who applies for and gets roles in your organization, especially in terms of young people. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll feel much more confident advocating for inclusive recruitment practices, knowing how they benefit applicants at your organization and the wider cinema and film sector as well. I'm just going to hand over to Louise for the next slide.
So from the second half of the session, we hope that particularly any young people who are here to hear about what they can do, we hope that this session will help you know what to look for about an organization when you are thinking about applying for a role, help you feel empowered to make decisions about potential employers based on ethics and your personal values, and also to learn one thing that you could do tomorrow to help with your job search. So we're just, Duncan has given an excellent kind of brief introduction to who Fair Museum Jobs are, but we just want to give you a bit more information about kind of what we do. So we are a grassroots collective movement of museum professionals. So we're a committee of 5 people who kind of all got together because we were sick of shouting into the void on Twitter about how we saw so many jobs advertised that weren't fair, were underpaying, or asking for too much, or both in many cases. So we came together to form a collective to establish a better standard for museum job recruitment based on the principles of fairness, transparency, equity, and inclusivity. And we've done this through writing our manifesto for good practice in these areas. And what we do to support this is we challenge bad practice that we come across, particularly in museum and heritage jobs. We celebrate good practice. And increasingly, we provide support and advice to the workforce, employers, and to sector organisations, both in museums, but also increasingly outside of museums, like here with the Independent Cinema Office.
And yeah, just to give you a little more visual flavor of what we do, I've got lots of images on the screen here, but we operate in lots of different ways, mostly digitally, even pre-COVID. So we have our website where you can find our manifesto and lots of different resources about how to, for both employers and workers, about how to recruit more effectively and more equitably. We also have a Twitter account, Instagram account. We have a YouTube account where we post a lot of our campaigns, a lot of our call outs, as well as some memes. We love a good meme as well. We do lots of public speaking, like coming to events like this, as well as podcasts, blog posts, that kind of thing. So you can find a lot of that on our website. And last year, we actually did our first ever careers summit. That was completely free to attend. It was a week-long online summit, and a lot of the sessions are available to access for free on our YouTube channel as well. So just to give you a flavor of what we do. And as Louise said, obviously we are coming from a museum context speaking to you all today, but we feel that a lot of the recruitment practices and ideas that we advocate for are relevant across a much wider range of sectors. So just to kick off, so thinking about how employers can be more inclusive to young people when recruiting. So before we get started with some of the actionable things that you can actually do if you're an employer, just to kind of emphasize why this matters, especially to young people. So those new, as Duncan actually mentioned in his introduction, those new to the job market or the film sector, for example, are more likely to be negatively impacted by exclusionary recruitment practices. Things like lower salaries and less job security that are common in more junior roles mean that things like fair pay and being transparent around pay are even more important because there's kind of less leeway there. And things like inaccessible job descriptions, confusing or difficult application forms, interview formats that are intimidating or complex can particularly discourage young people from applying or prevent them from getting a certain role. So now kind of moving on to, I've got a series of a bunch of quick things that you can do to make your recruitment more inclusive. Some of these might feel quite punchy. Some of them maybe you'd never thought of doing before, but that's the whole idea of today, is to hopefully challenge and expand people's perspectives a little bit. That's what we like to do, but we're always welcome to answer questions and discuss and debate at the end. So the main thing that you can do, the very first thing that almost all organizations can do, actually all organizations can do, is to clearly state the salary when you're putting out a job post, or the hourly rates. And if it's part-time, showing what the pro rata calculation for that salary is. So it doesn't have to be an exact number. It can be a range like 25 to 27,000. But the main thing is we don't want to see any quote competitive or negotiable salaries, salary secrecy. So why is this important? Well, there's research to show that particularly Black candidates, female candidates, younger candidates are disadvantaged by salary secrecy, particularly in terms of pay gaps. Pay gaps are a problem across many different sectors. And if you're listing the salary, that helps stop the perpetuation of those pay gaps, because everyone knows exactly what the salary is going to pay, no matter who applies and who gets the job. Because you don't have to negotiate, for example, or ask for a certain salary. The other really important thing is, most people work because they need money, and if people and applicants need to know if a salary works for them. So if it doesn't pay enough for them to live on, and they don't know that until you get to the end of the recruitment process, then that's just been a big waste of time for everybody, basically. So it saves everyone time just to be upfront about what you're paying right at the beginning. It also shows that your organization values transparency and honesty. Something I'm going to talk about a little bit later is how people who are applying for your roles are also audiences. In some ways, they're the most engaged audiences. So what kind of message do you want to send out to them when you send out a job description? Transparency and honesty around salary are probably, the types of things that you want people to think about your organization. And also, from a practical perspective, some job listing sites now require you to list a salary in order for the job to be posted. So that's just another reason. Moving on. So showing the salary is important, but having a fair salary and fair pay to begin with is also important. So we'd advocate for paying at least the real living wage. So for example, in London, you could look at what the London living wage is, not just the minimum wage. Think about what it actually costs to live and work in the area where your organization is based. And if you're not sure, you can look at many sectors have salary guidelines, or you can look at trade union guidelines for salaries as well, where relevant, for example, BEC2 and Prospect, just to get an idea of what you should actually be paying for different roles. Obviously, why do this? Well, everyone needs enough money to live on. And also, if candidates and staff aren't worried about low pay, you'll get more out of them, and you'll hopefully reduce staff turnover and improve morale as well if people aren't always looking for a better paid job. It's kind of a false economy to pay people a very, very low wage, because you're constantly going to be losing those people and having to re-recruit in general. Other things that we see a lot are oftentimes applications will ask for what the applicant's previous salary was, or what their salary expectations for this role will be. So we advocate for not doing either of these things. The reason for not doing these things is basically it disadvantages young people and entry-level applicants in particular who may not have a previous salary or may not know enough about the sector to know what the salary expectations should be, but that doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be paid fairly. It also, again, perpetuates gender and racial pay gaps. If someone has been chronically underpaid or discriminated against in terms of pay, if you base their future salary based on their last salary, that's going to just perpetuate that. It also disadvantages people moving from areas with different living costs. For example, moving from an area with a low cost of living where you might be able to get away with a lower salary to a higher cost of living area, for example, London. You don't want to base the salary on someone who's come from a completely different living context. And one of the reasons we often hear from employers is why they use previous salary and salary expectations in applications is kind of a proxy for understanding the person's level of seniority or experience at a previous organization. But actually, this is a really inaccurate measure of those things because there are other factors that come into play in someone's former salary or salary expectations. Things like if they've come from a different sector, if they've come from a different size of organization, if they've come from a different part of the country, or perhaps a different country entirely. All of these things have a big impact on what someone's salary history has been. And it's not necessarily going to tell you if they're actually, experienced enough for your role. So yeah, we would recommend not doing that. So moving on from the money onto things like qualifications. So for example, university degrees. We advocate for minimizing qualification requirements in person specifications as much as possible. Really challenge yourself and your colleagues when you're writing your job description, what qualifications in particular are really, really necessary for the role. And if you do really feel that you need a university degree, for example, clearly state in the job description what the equivalent experience would be if the person isn't able to show that degree. So the reasons for doing this are we don't have equal access to qualifications, especially things like university in this country or in many other places. So disadvantaging someone based on, for example, if they have a disability or they are in a different financial situation or for whatever reason they couldn't attend university, that doesn't mean they're not a good candidate for your role. And if you hire everyone who's come through the same route in life, you're going to have a much more uniform workforce, which is not necessarily a good thing. It's good to have different views and different backgrounds, different experience. It makes your organization stronger. And I think the really main point to hit home here is that qualifications are just a method of gaining knowledge and experience. So getting a university degree is a way of gaining knowledge about something. But if what you really want from the applicant is their knowledge or skills, just focus on those, focus on the main outcome. Don't focus on one particular method of getting those skills. Next is thinking about proportionate and clear criteria in your job descriptions. Ensuring the number of criteria in the person spec are proportionate to the role. So if it's an entry-level position, does it really need to have 30 or 40 different bullet points that the person needs to cover, or could it be reduced? Making sure you're speaking in clear and concise language, avoid jargon where you can. We all have industry-specific terms, but just try to be as clear and straightforward as you can. And making sure that the application method matches the job description and what's required of the applicant. So sometimes we'll see, a person spec that's 1,000 words long, and they ask the applicant to write a cover letter of no more than 500 words. Well, it would be physically impossible to actually to talk about all of those requirements within the space allotted. So just kind of thinking through those things a bit more before you put out your job ad. And again, focusing on the requirements of the role and what's actually needed to perform the job well, rather than thinking about things like personality traits. We often want someone outgoing with a good sense of humor, etc. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a second. So why do these things? Well, again, it's about hiring the best person for the job, not the person who's best at filling in application forms. Young people in particular may have had less experience filling in different types of applications, so they might not know how to do it or all the tips and tricks. And there are others who find applications challenging as well. If they have certain disabilities or don't have access to certain technology. And also, things like personality traits are incredibly subjective. What I think is a good sense of humor isn't necessarily what you think. There's no objective way of assessing that, and it can also disadvantage certain applicants, such as people who are neurodiverse or from different cultures, different languages. And it just guards against hiring in your own image, which all humans are prone to do. Okay, closing dates. So we advocate for choosing a closing date for a job ad that is reasonable, and that would be at least 3 weeks, although if you can give more time, that's always better. Pick your closing date carefully, because once you've picked it, you should stick to it. If for some reason you cannot stick to it, you have to extend it. For example, do give updates to applicants. People don't like to be left waiting. And don't treat, if you get an application early, don't treat it more favorably, or an application received right on the deadline, don't treat that unfavorably. Why do this? Well, some people, for example, if someone has a disability, they may require support to complete applications, and they need time to arrange this. Also, people have lots of other commitments. They can't always apply immediately. It doesn't mean they're not passionate or don't want the role or that they're disorganized. It just means that they need a bit more time. Also, it's not just the applicant's responsibility to find your job posting. If you're an organization, it's also your responsibility to ensure you get that job posting out to as many places as possible. And if an applicant doesn't see it until a couple of days before, that's not really necessarily their fault. And making assumptions about candidates based on when they apply introduces bias. And again, it's not a fair assessment of how interested someone is in the role. Contact details, this is a pretty simple one, but yeah, do make sure you have a person to contact during the entire application process, and a backup if someone is sick or has to, go on holiday. And consider running things like social media Q&As for job roles or video explainers. These are particularly good for younger people you might be trying to recruit. And again, younger people or less experienced applicants, they might have more questions about the job. Other groups may need to ask more questions if they have caring responsibilities, disabilities, any kind of special requirements. And it just helps your organization receive better applications if they know more about the role. You're not going to waste your time with a bunch of applications that are kind of irrelevant. And if there are any mistakes in the job adverts, they can get picked up more quickly if you're kind of in regular contact or easily contactable by applicants. Okay, interview expenses. So if you're doing interviews in person, which maybe some of you already are, maybe we might continue to do more of in future with COVID easing, do pay interview expenses. Or if you can't do that, accommodate alternatives such as video call or phone. And we're all very used to video call these days, so that should hopefully be no issue for most people. Interview travel can be expensive. And you don't really want to disadvantage an applicant just because they can't afford a train ticket. So, and not everyone has easy access to travel or time off for interviews, whether that be because of their employment or because of caring responsibilities or a number of other things. So video can often be more accessible, even without COVID. Reasonable accommodations. So making reasonable accommodations for the interview process is really important. So ask people if they need any and implement them if they do. Other things to do are not assuming all young people are really tech savvy in terms of which platforms you're using if you're interviewing someone online. And also keep in mind that not everyone has their own device either easily accessible, especially young people. If you're, why do this? Because you're looking for the best candidate for the role, not the one with the best tech, the best internet connection, or the quietest flatmates. It ensures all candidates are interviewed on a level playing field. And also, if a candidate is marginalized, for example, a disabled candidate who might want to see the questions in advance, it allows them to be seen at their best and allows you to really make a fair assessment of whether they can do the role, not if they're just the best at interviews. This is kind of a similar points with interview strategy. So what you actually might do in the interview process, do inform candidates of who's going to be on the panel ahead of time, and the format as well, whether it's question and answer, if there's a presentation, anything like that. There's really no reason to have surprises in interviews. Ask short questions, ask positive questions so people can feel confident and be at their best. Allow for a range of potential experience in the answers. Don't just have one idea in your mind of what the answer should be. Do keep an open mind, and consider sharing questions in advance, as we said before, to all candidates, but especially if someone asks for them. Why do this? Well, it encourages more honest and accurate answers. If people aren't feeling stressed, if they're feeling, calm and relaxed and confident. And it also just ensures everyone has a good understanding of the role and the candidate's suitability, reducing risks of problems after hiring. And it helps because it helps your organization find the best candidate for the job, not one who's just really good at doing interviews. And just in general, an interview is a meeting. It's a chance to get to know each other, find out about the role, find out about the candidate. It's not an exam. So there's really, giving someone the questions in advance, they're not going to be able to cheat. It just means that they can prepare and be able to answer your questions better. So after the interview process, maybe you've decided who you want to hire, and you obviously have some candidates who you haven't hired. In terms of feedback, please do give feedback to all interviewed candidates. But even better, if you really want to get in our good books, you can give feedback, or at least the choice to receive feedback, to all applicants. Do consider the timing of when you give feedback. Sometimes it's better not to give it right when you're rejecting a candidate. Sometimes it's nice to just offer them the opportunity to get it at a later time, because not getting a job is always not a nice feeling. Be constructive, be actionable, and be honest in your feedback. There's really no point in just giving vague, sort of nice vagaries. That doesn't help anybody. So what I really want to emphasize here is that applicants are audiences. If someone's applying for a role at your organization, chances are they're very highly engaged with you. So think about how you would want audiences to feel after they've had an interview with you, and try to treat applicants in the same way, because they can be your future supporters if they've had a good experience, or detractors if they've had a bad experience, and they'll tell other people about it too, trust me, because they tell us. Candidates do spend a long time on applications, so giving feedback on them is fair. It's kind of the least that we can do as employers. And also, if you're having to share feedback about rejected candidates with them, it ensures that the person who's recruiting is going to be making very objective and evidence-based decisions if they have to kind of, stand by them. Again, it shows that your organization values honesty and transparency. And just to kind of emphasize that, giving constructive feedback is a gift. It's not hurting someone's feelings, even if the person doesn't feel that great about it at the time. They'll be grateful for it later. Before I move on to Louise, I just wanted to cover one last thing, volunteers. So this is a whole other kettle of fish in itself. We could spend a whole session about volunteers, but I know that there's a lot of volunteers in cinema and film, so I just wanted to touch on it briefly here. If you're advertising for volunteer roles, make sure that they're clearly labeled as such, so people don't think that they're paid jobs. Make sure that you provide details of what expenses are covered and any other benefits the volunteers might get. And remove things like required or essential qualifications or experience. These are not really appropriate for a volunteer position. Those are appropriate for a job role. And don't require volunteers to provide their own equipment to be eligible, for example, a camera. Why do this? Well, volunteering already by its nature of giving up time for free can be a bit exclusionary, because not everyone has the time or resources to be able to do that. So if you're paying things like expenses, that can help open up opportunities. Volunteering shouldn't have gatekeeping criteria in the same way as applying for a job does. Organizations benefit from new perspective, skills, and ideas if you can recruit from a wider range of volunteers. And volunteers, again, just like with applicants, if you treat them well, they can be your biggest advocates. Again, volunteers are key audiences as well. And because volunteers are giving up their time and expertise for free, they should really be the main beneficiary of the relationship with your organization. So if you are thinking about a volunteer role and you're thinking about what your organization's getting from it, but you can't think of much that the volunteer is getting back, maybe you need to rethink the role a little bit more. So that's the end of my session. I'm going to stop sharing now, and we're going to do a quick change, and Louise is going to share her screen. So we don't have to say quick, next slide, please, constantly. And yeah, I will hand over to Louise now.
Hello, sorry, I have just lost the window as everyone always does. There has to be a problem at some point. So give me a second to just get my correct notes back. Otherwise, who knows what I'll be saying, because I definitely do not know. All right, I'm hoping that you can still see a screen share. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so Ashley has talked through kind of from an employer perspective what is good practice, particularly in the before someone starts in a role. And I suppose what I'm looking at in this half is what is potentially good for an applicant to do before applying, or perhaps before starting a role. However, a lot of this I think is also going to be relevant perhaps to your own organization and where you are now. And it might throw up some thoughts about what is or isn't in place where you're currently working. So why should you find out about an organization before you apply there? Well, we spend potentially a third of our lives at work, and that is a lot of hours. And I don't want to calculate it because it won't be fun. But we are there a lot, and we deserve to be treated well while we're at work. And not all organizations are equal at treating people well. And I'm sure those of us who've had a few jobs can think of some that were better than others, across the spectrum. But particularly for young people, people coming into the workforce, and people changing career into a completely different sector, you just might not have this knowledge instantly at your fingertips. So what I'm going to present is ways to places you can go to do that research, where you can find out this information about organizations, because essentially knowledge is power, and it will allow you to make decisions based on what is important to you in your career, and maybe just in your next job, or even in the wider sense. So the first set of sources that you can have a look for is just kind of open information, general searches that you can run. And there's quite a few options for this. So firstly, word of mouth. Do you know anyone who works there? That could be someone you only know on Twitter. It doesn't have to be someone that you've met in real life. It could be someone who's in a mutual network of yours. Ask them about their experiences when you're thinking of applying, or maybe they have someone else that you could contact. And this can be really important because you can get a really good overview of what somewhere is really like from a perspective, or maybe someone who used to work there but doesn't anymore might have a different perspective as well. I recognize that having this kind of network of people you might be able to speak to is a privilege. If you're new to the sector, you might not have that. If you it can be hard to build that network over time, so it just might not be an option for everybody, but that's okay. There's loads of other options that you can consider. So something as basic as Googling the organization can throw up a lot of interesting stuff. Look at the results that come up under news. Are there things there that concern you, that don't work with your views, that indicate how they're treating their workforce and employees? Are there projects that they're working on that are really interesting to you? It can work in both ways. You can also have a look at some of the sector publications. I've highlighted kind of maybe Screen International or Deadline in my notes, but I think there's a lot of other options that you might be able to find. Have a look at what's in there. They often pick up stories around cinemas, workforce practice. And I know when I had a look, I could certainly find a lot of information about the varying events at Cineworld over time and things like that. So have a look there and find out what's going on. You can also have a look at the website Glassdoor, and you'll see that I've highlighted some screenshots on this page that are from the Glassdoor review of working at the British Film Institute. And the website Glassdoor, if you haven't heard of it, features reviews of companies from current and past employees. And people can also review their interview experiences as well. So it can give you an insight into what an organization is like, what the working environment might be like. I would say you obviously have to just read with a critical frame on that, because you don't always know what people's experiences have been, but it can be a good introduction. Sometimes the information could be a little bit out of date because the CEO of the BFI hasn't been Greg Dyke for quite a long time. So you just need to have a look at what they're specifically referring to. But people can post negative and positive reviews. And the way that it structures is it gives people the chance to put some pros and cons and advice in their posts. So you can get a kind of good overview of what might be good or bad. Also have a look at social media. So there's the organization's social media themselves. You can look at what they're shouting about publicly, but doing a more general search on social media might show things that they perhaps aren't shouting about that other people are shouting at them about. So it's always worth having a look there. And you can also see things like how engaged are they in the local area, in the wider sector, more in public projects, wider campaigns, and all kinds of things like that. And then obviously do have a look at their website. I think something really important with looking at the website is to work out how accessible is it? What can you tell about their approach to accessibility as an organization from their website? If you go on their website and it's impossible to find anything, that might indicate some things about what it might be like to find information when you're working there. I would say, depending on the organization, like if you're looking at a local authority or something run by a council or a government, they might not get as much of a say as a more independent organization. So it's not a guarantee, but it is definitely a good starting point. It's you really want to get a sense of who makes decisions at the organization and where the money comes from. And this is particularly important when you're perhaps thinking about some of your personal values. And most of this information should be publicly accessible for quite a lot of types of organizations. On looking specifically, especially at sort of charities and registered companies, they will have to do annual reports. Those are often available on the website. Most organizations will have an About Us section of their website, which contains information about governance, staffing, annual reports, policies, all kinds. It could be anything. And I've got a screenshot here of the BFI's About Us page, which features some things like annual reports and financial statements, and that kind of thing has to be published. You can also have a look on the Charity Commission website. So they have to list the charitable trustees for an organization and publish accounts, and depending on the size, a report. And you can have a look at these accounts and see where some of the money is coming from. So something that's been quite big for museums is looking at who is sponsoring organizations, particularly in the light of climate change. Organizations that are sponsored by oil companies are having, that's in the press quite a lot, and there's a lot more issues around that. So if that's an issue that's really close to you and really important, you might want to think about whether this organization might be a good ethical fit for you based on where their money is coming from. It can be difficult to get a full picture of the governance from these, but it is a good place to start. Always, I recommend reading the annual report of an organization before your interview. It can give you some good ideas for questions to ask, but it also kind of gives you an overview of what they want to brag about that's happened in the last year. And you can kind of see how aligned that might be with what interests you and what projects might motivate you as well. As I say, have a look at sponsors. I mean, a lot of film festivals are going to have sponsors to look at, and depending on the size, that could be quite local or it could be much more international. So have a look at how that aligns with your values and what you would want to support. And then also have a look at who is at the top of the organization. So they could be a director, a CEO, chief executive officer, could be any kind of job title like that. Find out who they are. And especially for larger organizations, you should be able to Google them and find out more about them. So for example, the BFI got a new CEO last year, and he did quite a round of interviews in the kind of sector press talking about his vision for the organization. So if you're looking at those kinds of organizations, have a look and see, because that will really dictate what that organization is focusing on, because it comes from the top. So I'm not going to read through this entire list of policies and public statements. These are the kinds of policies you might expect an organization to have, or the kinds of statements that you might have expected people to make. The key thing here is to work out what is important to you and what is most likely to impact on your working and wider work-life balance. So for example, a parental leave policy might not be relevant to you at this point in your life when you're 20, But when you're 25, 30, 35, that might be much more of a factor in your life planning. And that's the point at which you might want to know what that organization's policy is around parental leave. So you can definitely have a look for all of those. I think something else to think about is public statements and what do they mean. So I think a lot of us will be able to think back as far as the heady days of a year ago, when a lot of organizations were making their Black Lives Matter statements, publishing their black squares on their social media. Well, that's all well and good, but what did they do about it? What can you find out the follow-up from that initial statement? Are people committed to the work in their organization, or are they just committed to making a statement that shows that they have made a statement? And that can be true for a lot of areas. So Black Lives Matter is certainly one of them, but also Pride and LGBTQ. Do they just change their logo to a rainbow for a month, but for 11 months, ignore everything about LGBTQ+? These are all things to consider if they're things that are important to your personal values. There's also quite a few workplace accreditations relating to recruitment and the working environment. They're not a guarantee of excellent practice in all areas, but they can indicate that an organization is trying to reach a particular level. So I've pulled out a few of them here. And some are things that people have to apply for and fill in lots of paperwork, prove they have policies and procedures in place. I know that the top one at the top there, investors in people or volunteers, as part of that, they actually interview some of the current employees or current volunteers at the organization to help decide whether that accreditation should be awarded. So it's not just about having a lot of policies that are written, it's about what the action is that's taking place. We've talked about pay in Ashley's section. She talked about it, and you can register as accredited with the Living Wage Foundation, which I know that the Independent Cinema Office have and other organisations increasingly do. There are other things like disability confident employer status, and that's supposed to confer a particular set of things around recruiting confidently for disabled applicants. There are also things around mental health, like the Mind Workplace Wellbeing Index, which some organisations have taken part in, and the Race at Work Charter. This is not a comprehensive list. I know there are a lot more. So organisations like to brag about these. So you will normally see them in a job pack or on their website if they have registered for some. And you can have a look at what that actually means that they're doing. There's a lot of numbers that you can consider in your research. I've noted salaries here. We obviously, as Ashley said, we advocate for real living wage. You can go and do some research about whether that salary is fair, but also whether that salary is right for you. Even if it is fair, you need to have an idea of what is an acceptable salary for you personally. Some organizations are publishing statistics about their workforce. Best practice is organizations that publish statistics more than the legal minimum. So the legal minimum is that organizations over a certain size have to publish a gender pay gap. And I've shown the BFI's most recent one here from the government website. But other organizations are taking that further, and they're really being more upfront about their workforce for gender, ethnicity, disability, LGBTQI+, and sometimes other criteria as well. Publishing a pay gap, again, that's fine. Publishing what you're going to do about it is even better. So has that organization said that they're working towards closing their pay gaps, and how are they doing that? What are they doing to change the diversity of their workforce? What are they really committed to in their organization? And some people here might also be looking at organizations that are funded through the Arts Council, and they have to publish something called creative case data, and that's all accessible on the Arts Council website as well. It can be quite worth looking into what staff support exists at an organization. And this can take loads of different forms. The first and perhaps easiest one can be to find out if there are any recognized unions. And what can you see about what they're doing? Are they active in the workplace? And that can be as easy as just searching for the name of the company, the name of the organization, and union, and see what comes up. It's usually quite easy to find. And particularly in cinemas, I think BEC2 is one of the most frequently used ones, but there are others that could be relevant as well, depending on how that organization is run. So perhaps Prospect in the wider sense, Unison maybe, the University College Union as well. There's loads of things that it might be, but you can ask that question as well when you're thinking of applying. It's okay. You legally cannot be penalized for union activity or that kind of thing. So you don't have to worry about bringing that up. There might also be staff networks that are sort of less formal than a union, particularly for Black staff or people of color staff networks. They can be called a lot of different things: race equality, all sorts of different names for essentially a similar type of group. There might be LGBTQ+ networks. There might also be networks that support staff in particular roles. So for example, I've worked in an organization that had a kind of administrative group. So people who were PAs or admin staff would get together and talk about their best practice and kind of learn from each other as well. And those networks could be quite wide. So if your part of the organization is perhaps part of a local authority or a council, you might find that network allows you to access a lot more areas of the organization. And they might have their own social media presence, perhaps if they're quite well developed, but HR should know those for a company. And you may be able to contact them directly as well. It's something that is quite important to me. One of kind of my personal values is around mental health support. And this is kind of increasingly important in a lot of organizations, I think. And I like to always ask, like, what support is there for mental health in the workplace? So mental health first aiders are increasingly common, but also access to mental health training, especially for line managers, but not exclusively. Are there other mental health services that people can access? Some workplaces might have signed something like the Time to Change pledge, or they might be working with Mind and their Wellbeing Index. And those are all things that I personally, I value looking for in employers. Larger organizations might also have an employee assistance program. So those are a contract with another company that provides support to employees, but that support can be extremely wide-ranging. It's not just job-based or work-based. I've been in part of organizations where you can access free counseling, legal support, online webinars, training, advice about moving. They'll help you organize moving if you need to. You can get financial advice, and all of that is free to access through this workplace support program. And also, how is that organization going to support you personally with your training and development? So I think in any role, you want to know that there might be something next or something that you could work towards. And that might be the thing you're working towards might be being the best you can possibly be at that role, or it might be that that role is a stepping stone to something else. So how is that organization going to support you? Do they have their own training that they run? Are you going to have to look for your own opportunities? Are they going to help you pay for that training? And these are all things that can be kind of really important to look for. So I know that that's quite a whistle-stop tour through things you can research. I've gone quite fast. We can make these slides available afterwards as well, so don't panic, because I know there's links and things like that. So we can have our ICO colleagues can send these slides out to anyone who would like them, or everyone if that's easier. So we will make that available. We just want to talk a bit about some next steps that people can take from this, and I'm going to pass back to Ashley first.
Hi, thanks. So yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of next steps for everybody here, I think the key thing is really to kind of start the conversation and to not be afraid of change, to kind of welcome change. Both Louise and I have covered a lot of different things today. And some of it might seem a little bit overwhelming, especially in compacted into an hour. So it's just about seeing what can you do today, like what change can you make right now. Maybe it's something small, maybe it's something big, and just starting there and then kind of developing over time. We don't necessarily expect everyone to do everything right off the bat. So yeah, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, as the famous saying goes. And be transparent and honest about that. I think a lot of organizations, I think there's still kind of a fear of like showing that they're still working on something or that they're not perfect, that there has to be this kind of like really like perfect professional front. And actually most people, and I think particularly younger people, actually really appreciate transparency and honesty, that organizations aren't perfect either and they're also on a journey. So I think, being transparent, but look, this is what we can do right now. It's not perfect, but this is what our plan is. Kind of some of the stuff Louise was talking about as well. Yeah, I mean, chip in, Louise, here wherever you want, but otherwise I'm just going to keep talking.
I think something that is particularly important when you are a job seeker, actually at any point in your career, whether you are a young person in this session or whether you are one of the employers who's thinking, I might want to move jobs sometime soon, think about what your personal values are and what's important to you. Only you can know what the most important factors are in your own job hunt and in deciding where you want to work. And then only you can know what you're willing to compromise. And that's really what you need to know that you're making the best choice of where to go and what to do, and whether it's the right time for any of these things to happen. I'd also really like to normalize asking questions. As Ashley said in her section, it's important for an employer to have someone who is that point of contact. Well, if an employer is going to list that as a list of point of contact for a job, our responsibility as applicants is to make sure that they're doing their job by asking them some questions. So if there's something missing from the application information that you need to know, contact the person listed and ask them about it. That is why they're listed, so that potential applicants can know if it's the right job for them, the right job for you to apply for at that time. And the same goes for interviews. As Ashley said earlier, interviews aren't an exam. They are about getting to know each other, and you need to get to know an organization just as much as that organization needs to get to know you. So it is okay to ask questions about the things that are important to you. And I know some of the advice online is to never mention conditions or workplace issues or unions in your interview. But if it's the right organization for you that has the right values, then asking those questions should never count against you, because it shows that you're invested and you know what's important to you. And I think all organizations should want to hire people with a strong core of beliefs. But then I would say that because I run Fair Museum jobs on the side, so I would think that's true. Anything else you want to add, Ashley?
No, I think you covered it. I think we've been talking for quite a while, so it might be nice to let some other people speak or ask any questions. I'm sure there are some. So
that was absolutely terrific, folks. I really appreciate that. Just so packed full of information, and I'm very glad that you were able to share those afterwards. And I should say all of the sessions are recorded, and if you want to refer back, it's very we'll be sharing the links to those in the coming weeks as we get a chance to upload them. But I think and please do start dropping questions in the chat for anything that's sparked off a question for you. But I'll ask some questions that occurred to me straight off. I think we can all generally assume that when you put up a job advert, you want to get the best applicants, and people do want to approach us with the sort of the best aspirations. But from your perspective, what are the kind of common things that stop people improving their recruitment practices? What are the kind of things you should watch out for if you what not to do?
Yeah, I think we can both take this one. So some of the things, I think some of them we already kind of referenced a little bit in the presentation, but just I think to kind of recap, like the feedback that we often get from employers about why our manifesto, for example, and some of the things we advocate for aren't practical are like stuff like, oh, well, often there's a focus on qualifications like university degrees, like, oh, well, you know, often there's a perpetuation of, well, I needed to do this to get into this role, therefore other people should have to do it too. There's kind of this, there's this sense of, well, you know, it's been tough for everyone. It's always been tough, and that should be how it continues to be. And well, I mean, if someone genuinely believes that, well, there's nothing we can do to change their mind, but we just don't really think that that is a sustainable or good approach. If organizations, whether they be cinemas or film institutes or museums or wherever, if they want to remain relevant in the future, it's just, you know, just perpetuating the same things because it's always been done that way is not really a sustainable plan, I think. And I think also there's just a lot of kind of misconceptions about what certain recruitment practices actually mean and what their impact is. I just think a lot of the time people really knock up job descriptions really quickly because, you know, often there's a need, there's an urgency to fulfill a role, and there's not a lot of thought that's actually put into what the impact will be on applicants. So what was the other example that was in my presentation? Oh yeah, asking for like previous salaries and stuff like that, that is kind of, you know, people often use, or asking for degrees, like these are often proxies for, instead of actually thinking about what the skills that are actually needed for the role. And so things just kind of get copied and pasted over time. Louise, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think my point kind of directly follows on there. I think actually something that happens quite frequently is that we're all trying to do a lot really quickly. So it's really easy to just pull up the last time that job was advertised and like give it a 2-second glance over and go, yeah, nothing's changed about what we're doing, and go for it. But actually spending even 10 minutes going through it and thinking, do I actually need this? Is this a true representation of what's important in this job, can like change how you think about what you're putting out there into the world. Because it's very unlikely that nothing has changed since you last advertised a particular role. And if you're doing it very close together, then perhaps that indicates that you didn't recruit for the right thing in the first place, one might suggest. So there's a need to review every time you do that. It doesn't have to be onerous, but it can, just looking at it with that view of who might be put off by this. Like for each sentence, like what does that mean to someone who isn't experienced, who doesn't already work here? Will someone actually know what I'm saying and what I'm asking for? And just taking a really critical eye to it, as you would if you were reading for a job you were thinking of applying for. That can really kind of change your thinking and take that forward. And it's not that people are lazy, it's that we're all under a lot of pressure. And I think it's just important to sort of take the time to really do a recruitment process properly, because of all the reasons that Ashley said around it helping you retain people for longer and get the right people in the first place, and all of that is really important.
Yeah, no, that's great. I couldn't agree more with what you said. I mean, just to Thea's made a very good point in the chat that you know, like, I mean, obviously I know that recruiters will have issues with this in terms of the time onus, but just a simple email to say when you're for recruiters, when they receive an application, to say it's been received, even if you have an auto reply, that can be very, very useful, because that feeling of like, I spent a lot of time on, you know, as you say, with that sort of thing of like the people who are applying for jobs, often people have a huge stake in your organization, creating a very, very sort of like detailed, powerful, you know, kind of application that then potentially never, you don't even receive a reply about, no feedback on. That can be quite dispiriting. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of approaching recruitment. I
think something else that brings kind of Thea's point and actually the question that you asked together is that sometimes if you've been in a role for a long time, you've forgotten what it's like to go through the recruitment process. And I think it's just really important that we do all remind ourselves that process can be frustrating and difficult. And I think at the moment, especially, there aren't lots and lots of jobs, and we're hearing people telling us in museums that they're applying for 20, 30, 40 jobs and not getting things back. And just remember that we're all human people that need to be interacting with each other, and just that kind of basic courtesy. And as has been added in the chat, if you're rejecting an application, you need to tell people. No, I don't think it's acceptable to say on a job description, if you don't hear from us within 2 weeks of the closing deadline, then so long and thanks for all the fish. You need to close that off for everyone who's put in the time to apply for your job, because it could be easily a few hours, half a day, or for people who find the process difficult, who are less familiar with it, who could be young people, disabled people, all kinds of candidates, that could be a full day of work that they've done on that application, and that's the least that people deserve.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. One of the things that I've seen in other contexts is a more of a recruitment roadmap. So people sort of say, kind of like on the actual sort of listing, like applications open, applications closed, first round of interviewing, kind of like job start. And I think, just looking at it from a recruiter's perspective, sometimes even just writing down that roadmap can make you ask really hard questions where you kind of go, okay, well, actually, we've got this event that week, and we need to sort of, how are we going to fit that all in, and like just getting everyone round together to agree what the slots are, when everyone's working a mile a minute, it can really help both the applicants' experience, so they've got transparency around when they might hear, and also from recruiter's perspective that you're really on it and you're not leaving people hanging, because that can be, if you've been to interview and you don't hear for several weeks, that can be very, very challenging.
Yeah. Sorry, Duncan, just wanted to jump in quickly on that last point. Yeah, I think that's a really key. Again, it just kind of comes back to just putting in a little bit more thought to that application process. Not a lot more, but because we're all busy, and I've hired plenty of people in my life, and it's a busy and time consuming process, but it's just a little bit more time. And it's a false economy to not spend any time on that, because you end up not getting as many good candidates. You end up having to re-recruit. So you're really doing yourself a favor, not just the applicants. And also I would add, that point about thinking about the timeline. One thing we didn't include in the presentation, but one thing we see a lot is like job applications, and also like freelancer proposals and briefs and stuff, things being due on bank holidays and like on Christmas Day and New Year's Day and all kinds of, it's like, put a closing date when you're actually going to look at the applications. Like, don't put it at midnight on a Saturday, like, unless you really are coming into the office at 12:01 to look at them. Like, give people the maximum amount of time. Don't just think about your own convenience, think about other people's as well. So yeah, I think most people aren't malicious. They're not doing that on purpose. They're just not really thinking it through.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I guess one of the things I wanted to ask about was whether you felt like there was any potential opportunity to road test or kind of like share job descriptions, because in a sense, once they're up, like those like the recruitment, it's not really right or proper to alter those, the recruitment, when you think, oh, actually, could we add this? There's sort of, it has to be when it's posted, it's finalized. But I guess, in terms of improving recruitment and getting into that mindset you mentioned of like, what is it like when I don't know what the organization's like from the outside? You're just seeing name of cinema, and then kind of like salary expectations. Do you think there's some sort of way of kind of both internally and externally kind of like doing some road testing and like taking that time? Have you had any experience of that, or any sort of, have you seen any of that kind of practice going on?
I think it's really good to have a critical friend that might sit outside your organization, or it might be that they just sit outside of this specific hiring process, depending on your organization. So someone who will read what you've written and be honest with you about what that means. And I mean, I'm like selling our services, but we do that for museums. I don't think we're necessarily the best place to do that for cinemas, but we do that for museums sometimes. But also, perhaps there is nothing wrong with needing to make a change because you realize that you've done something wrong and it's live. The thing that's wrong is if you don't communicate that. So we had a case recently where an organization had advertised a job, and then they had decided to add in the criteria of the fact that the person needed to have a driving license. And and they did tell the people who had applied that they had added this criteria, but the way that they told them was extremely abrupt. And we had an email forwarded to us that basically said, we've added a new criteria to this job. You no longer meet the brief. Your application has been removed. And that's like not the way to go about doing that. And I think things sometimes will have to change after they go live, but you need to communicate to anyone who has applied what has changed and why, and give people that chance to make an edit, change their application. They might want to withdraw their application if you've changed something really big. But I think, as Ashley and I have both said, I think putting in that time up front before you go live should prevent you from needing to make those changes, because it means that you have really thought about it. And maybe when it goes live, you have a massive rethink and you realize you need to withdraw and start again. Again, be upfront, be transparent, publish that information, put it on your social media, because that's where a lot of people are going to be seeing your jobs. So if you're taking something down to rewrite it, as often happens when we challenge organizations for their practice, they say, we need to take it away and think about it. Take it down, say that you've done that, say that you're reviewing it in light of X, Y, Z. And then when it goes back up, talk about what you changed and why. And I think especially for young people, but for all of us, it's good to have that transparency and to show that organizations are trying to make changes and improvements and kind of be better.
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, please, Ashley. Yeah, comment on that.
I think with road testing, I think also one thing that we're quite interested in is in the museum sector, and it potentially could be of use to the the film and cinema sector as well, but is just really turning recruitment on its head and kind of really rethinking the traditional like CV/application form, interview, job offer. That there are different routes into recruitment. So I've worked with a couple of museums recently who have done things like taster days. Like they do basically a much longer, kind of more holistic recruitment process where they might have a taster day where people, young, and this is great for young people in particular, who might come in and kind of see what a certain job is like. They might talk to certain members of staff, see the space, whatever. You could do a virtual one as well. And then, they're supported to make an application after that. So that's not necessarily the quickest route into getting applicants, but if it's something that you have the time and resource and your organization is really keen on getting new types of people applying, especially younger people, thinking about totally new ideas of doing recruitment. You don't just need to do the standard practice that's been like that for 100 years. You can make something that's more unique to your organization and your needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more people are seeing that there are ways to get, start from a very wide funnel. So like if you change your recruitment as a job description, like do all the work you're talking about, you access a much wider group of people, and then it becomes a smaller step, and almost like the more effort people are doing, the less people are doing more effort. So kind of like turning that on its head, where it's like people, a very wide group of people, some of whom might not be at all appropriate, but partly because your job advert isn't quite what it could be. So yeah, I think looking at the actual sort of interview process and what's going to reveal the best candidates is really important, rather than just relying on standard kind of like like standard interviews and then final selection. I guess the question I had was, what kind of changes have you folks seen in the museum sector as a result of kind of some of the work you've been doing? Like, what are the kind of like have there been sort of improvements in kind of how people are doing this kind of work?
I would say it's varied quite a lot, and I think it would be remiss not to mention that COVID has had a really massive impact on recruitment, and I think it has had a negative impact on people's practice in this area, because I mean, this is sort of my personal opinion from a Fair Museum Jobs perspective, but I think we were making some amount of headway, And then a lot of things changed in COVID. And I feel like perhaps it's going to be slower to maybe get back to where people were, which is a little bit ironic, because a lot of organizations coming out of COVID, Black Lives Matter, are talking about inclusivity, diversity, and its importance, but that isn't always following through to practice. But I would say the areas that we've kind of noticed as potentially us having the biggest impact on has some of that has been definitely around salaries. So we have been able to get quite a lot of organizations to rethink salaries, including some sort of shockingly low freelance day rates for work. And we haven't really talked much about freelancing in this session, but it is definitely an issue that freelance rates can be shockingly low on briefs. And we have really successfully got people to up those with another museum sector organization for freelancers. But I think a lot of it is raising it with people and opening up that conversation for all of us when we're looking for jobs, just feeling like you're able to point out when something might not be good practice. And the more people that are doing that, the more open those conversations can be. And I think we've had some challenges around things like why do you publicly tweet at organizations publishing their job descriptions, but those job descriptions are being published publicly? So discussion about them should equally be public, because we all have some investment in that process and it is meaningful. And so that's definitely something that I think is becoming a bit more of a focus for us. Ashley?
Yeah, I think just adding on to what Louise said, I think salary transparency is something I think there's starting to be a wider recognition of the fact that that's not acceptable anymore. We do still see it a fair bit. It's still very common in other job markets, like in the US and Canada. It's still extremely common, unfortunately, but it is getting less acceptable here, I think, which is good. Sorry, my cat's in the background. But one other thing that I think I hope, based on what Louise has said, is, just a recognition from organizations that recruitment, again, is a two-way process. It's not just, oh, we're going to open our doors at the time we want to and, welcome, applicants, and we are in control of everything and get to decide everything, and we're in control of the entire process. I think there's starting to be more recognition that recruitment is a two-way street. It's a two-way conversation. You will get feedback as well as giving feedback. And I think that that's really healthy.
Yeah, I think it has to sort of work for both sides, and actually for everyone's benefit. I think we're going to see that. I mean, I guess the only question I had, we're almost at time now, and I guess the only question I had is, having benefited a lot from your input ourselves, and we're looking forward to publishing our policy, which has many shared points with the work you've worked on, or your manifesto, I should say. What's how can people work with you if that's something that they want? They recognize some of the things that where their recruitment isn't where it could be. Like, is that something? How does that work?
Well, as I say, like we do have very much a museum focus, and I'm sure there are things that are specific to cinema and film that we don't necessarily know about or have ears on the ground. But I mean, people can always get in touch with us if they have a concern about things. We have an email address, we have a website, we have a Twitter account, we have an Instagram. So if people are concerned, we get DMs constantly from people who are like, what do you think about this? I'm being made redundant. I hate this job advert. I had a terrible experience in an interview. Like it's a real, kind of, it's like an anonymous diary, our DMs. So yeah, please, people are welcome to get in touch with us, and we try to help wherever we can. We are volunteers, and we all have full-time jobs. So I think we do a lot with five volunteers.
I'd say so.
We also try to ask people to bear with us too, because we can't always get in touch with people straight away. So
I think the only other thing I would add is, if anyone here is listening and thinking, oh, we should have this for cinemas or for film, and you'd like to set up fair cinema jobs, fair film jobs, do get in touch with us. We're really keen to have like sibling organizations. We've had some contact with people maybe thinking about the same for archives, for libraries, and internationally as well. So if you're here thinking that sounds like something I would like to do, be angry on Twitter in a specific way, then please do get in touch with us, and we can kind of help you think about what that might look like for you as well. Okay,
the movement starts here. I couldn't be happier. This is the way we're closing the kind of formal events for Young Audience Screening Days. So I'm just so grateful to you both for your insight, and I'm looking forward to sharing all the materials. And people should definitely, I should say, the amount of work and insight offered on your website was what originally drew me to your folks' work before I had sort of a face behind the work. So really push people to take a look at the to look at their website, because there's so much sort of in-depth research and thinking behind the policies. So there's not much more for me to say, except for I really, we're hosting an informal mixer at 5:30. So hopefully I can see some of you there, talk over what we've seen over the last few days, and any kind of like key learnings and things that maybe looking for collaborators on some of these projects, and bouncing ideas around. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next 50 minutes. The only other thing to say is we've got a link for Censor that you can watch over the weekend. You just need to opt in to watching it. So if you could just let us know via the email that was sent around on the days of the week that we've had the event so far, then we can be able to send it out to you. But it just remains for me to say thanks so much to Louise and Ashley for a great event, and thank you all so much for attending, whether I'll see you at the drinks or not. All right, bye folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.